Hello, Jamie from Inky and Scrappy, sharing with you today some spooky Halloween backgrounds. I totally enjoy mixed media. I tend to do more of it during the Halloween making season just because I think it's that process that I enjoy so much, and I can go deep and dark with it, and I can keep it light and whimsical, and anything in between. It's all good. So I started with the bricked stencil from Tim Holtz, and then I brought in some alcohol ink black cardstock. I was hoping for it to look like it ends up looking on the white cardstock. I didn't realize that it was as translucent as it is, and I'm sure it's so you can see the black little specks. I could have done the grave one from last year on this, and I probably would have gotten better results. So, I'm keeping that one squirreled away for the next time I want grave bricks on black paper. So I'm going to smear these on and then set them off to the side to dry. My only thing with the Tim Holtz stencil, I love all the detail in it. That's why I use them. I just wish they were bigger, 6x6 bigger, because I tend to do A2 size cards, or if I'm doing a bricked background for a project, it ends up being a lot bigger than that tag size. But it is what it is. So I'm going to put what I can back in the jar, and then I will go and clean up all the things, and then I will start on my next background while those dry. So this one is going to be that emboss resist look when it's all said and done. So I started by doing some anti-static powder on my sheet of Bristol Smooth cardstock to help keep the embossing powder from sticking all over the place. I only did it the first time, and I'm going in with the embossing ink here, and I still don't like the dauber thing for these fine texture or fine detailed style stencils, and so I'm just using the brush that I now have forever and always for my embossing ink through a stencil. It works amazingly well. And then I will ink this up. So I use white embossing powder from Brutus Monroe, the alabaster white. It's a finer I think it's a finer detail. I think it is. I use it for my white embossing of words on black cardstock, and I get good results with it. So I'm going to heat set that, and then it's just a process of moving that stencil over and lining it up. So I did end up just going over that last row of embossed skulls, so they lined up. So my spacing was even throughout. And so I just continued that process until the whole background was covered, embossed the whole thing. And then we're going to work with some Distress Oxides to add some color to it. So I started with Villainous Potion, went over the whole thing. And yes, I probably have more ink on my fingers than normal because that embossing powder resists, and so it sits on top. So I did spray it down just a little bit before I went in with the black soot. It probably wouldn't have mattered. And then I'm going to bring that black soot in, and I'm going to come in a little ways because my panel is bigger than A2. I'm going to be cutting it down a little bit. So I want that black edge to still be there without having to re-ink it after I cut it. And then I'm just going to buff off all of that Distress Oxide off the top. Going in with a light moist towel works well. If it's too wet, you're just going to re-wet the wing ink and pick it up and move it back on top. So if that helps. And then of course, because what's a good background without some splatter? I used some black soot distress paint, and then I also brought in some Empty Tomb mica spray stain to get some shimmer and shine on that background. And then I'm just going to splatter it liberally And then I'll clean that up and wait for it to dry. Isn't that pretty? White skulls, deep dark purple Halloween background. I love those colors. For my next one, I am just bringing in some of Lawn Fawn's glow in the dark glitter paste. I think it's called glitter paste. So some Lawn Fawn glow in the dark glitter paste, and then I'm just going to smooth this out over the top of my ghost stencil. The stencil is from Photo Play. It's a 2-part stencil, so the one part is the ghosts and the second part is the faces for the ghost. I bought it just for the faces on the ghost because what's creepier than like glowing eyes in the middle of the night, right? That's what I was looking for when I bought it. It was a last year card thing. And so I'm going to have to set this one off to the side to dry. And then I'm going to bring these back in. So at this point, these ones are dry enough to work with again. It might have been the next day. It probably was the next day. No, because the sun is still in my way. So late afternoon here before I go to chores, that sun is like right there. It's beautiful on a sunny day. It's nice and warm, but for filming, it's kind of annoying. So I kind of stand off to the side to cover it. I do not have curtains on my windows in my studio because I like the natural light. So I came in with some distressed crayons. I started with the antique linen, and then I only have the 2 full packs of the distressed crayons, and then I think I have a 3-pack of some of the newer colors. And so I had very limited color options here. So I ended up with, I want to say it was Twisted Citron was my green shade. And so I had to make it look a little rougher or, sooty. I don't know. I want to say sooty, like a dirtier green. I was really wanting like a forest moss color. I even tried to bring in the forest moss over the top on the white one to get that mossier look to my brick. And then I ended up coming in with that hickory smoke pencil on the white background one. And that kind of gave me the look I was going for. And I'm just putting my finger in a little bit of water to moisten it just a teeny tiny bit to help get those crayons to move. It doesn't take a whole lot of water, but it definitely speeds up the process of moving them around on the texture paste. And so I'm coming back in with this one, and it kind of still isn't looking like I want it to look. I did end up sopping up or spraying off a lot of that green. It was just too bright. And so I still have a hint of green there, not a whole lot, but it gives you that look of green. And yes, as it sits in the sun, you can see that there's definitely some green still in there. And so then I'm going to clean this all up. And then I set those off to the side. And I left this part in because, you know what? Sometimes it just doesn't go as planned. I was thinking that it was going to soak in a little bit better than it did, and it didn't on the top, and I didn't like it. So I ended up just spraying it all off of my grit paste. I think I had grave paste on that one. And then I'm just going to add some Distress Mica spray stains to this one to just give it some more shimmer and shine. And then I added some water to get water splatters. I really don't think it water splattered. It wasn't the proper paper to work with. I just grabbed a scrap of paper on my desk. It was what it was. So this one, I tested it in the corner to make sure that my Distress Oxides weren't going to stain my ghosts. Because if they were, then I was going to have to do something else, like just leave it white. But they worked where they buffed off, so I could go in with some forest moss and then again, some black soot to darken up those edges. And then knowing that this is probably going to be an A2, I did come in a little bit further with that black soot on the one side so I can die cut it out or cut it. I'll probably end up cutting this one with my guillotine cutter just because that embossing or the glow in the dark paste is so thick. And there is that matching stencil for the ghost faces. Now, I could have gone straight to what I used last year and known it worked. I was hopeful that I could get that face on the ghost without having to do the texture paste again. And so I tried just regular ink and that didn't work. I tried the Distress soot paint and that didn't work. Like straight on out of the bottle with the sponge dauber. Then I thought, well, maybe the little sponge dauber would be a little bit better because it wouldn't be as wet. But it's still, because they weren't perfectly even and level, it just didn't have a good enough seal. And so I just ended up erasing it again. That's the joy of Distress stuff. As long as it's wet, it'll always come off, right? So I ended up taking out the plain opaque texture paste, mixing some of that with the Distress paint. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word paint. Yeah, words are hard, people. And then I just took my palette knife and put those over the top of all of the faces. And I had done this last year with it, so I knew it was going to work for the most part. If it didn't work on all of them, I would just selectively cut and go from there. But it worked fine. So there is the ghost one. And then I will have to clean all this up. And yeah, I just, there's leftover paste. I'm going to throw it on this scratch piece. I'm thinking I have a big enough spot there that I can maybe get a gravestone out of it. Since it was made with grave paste and all. So there is that one. I'm just looking over them, deciding if I like how they finally finished and turned out. And so these ones are fairly dry, and I still wasn't over the top happy with that black one. Next time I do this one, I'm just going to take the opaque texture paste and mix in some gray paint, and then maybe sprinkle either some black sand, black glitter, or black embossing powder, and then just not heat set it to get a little bit of a black fleck if I want that black fleck, or some sort of variation to it. Live and learn. So there are the two bricked backgrounds, one on black, one on white, and then of course my pickup one and my skull one, and then the ghost. So that's 5. Probably 5 future cards in the making. And then I brought out my skeleton 3D folder. I love this folder. When I got it, I played a bunch with just running it through, figuring out how to ink it and run it through again to get those black recessed areas. I did, if you looked at the intro photo, you have those beautiful colored skulls. I had run it through, took my blending brushes and just kind of cleaned them off on the skulls, and then sprayed it with water to get them to kind of flow a little bit better. And then I had played with the black Distress ink, the black soot Distress oxide on the deep impression part of the folder, just rubbing it over to get them the black eyes and the black detail, and it worked. So I knew I could probably get it to work for sugar skulls. That's what I wanted. That's what that colorful skull one was kind of leaning towards, was sugar skulls. I love me a good sugar skull. And so I dug out some various red rubber stamps. I don't own a whole lot of floral ones, so I used the flower jar, and then I pulled a few images from the Crazy Birds accessory set. And so with my archival inks, I inked right directly onto the the embossing folder and got that beautiful result. So I wouldn't have had to come back in and color these. I did clean up my folder to try to get all of that ink off because I wanted to come in with my black, and I didn't want to get like a shadow if it shifted a little bit. So I went in with the black. I ran that back through the die cut machine to get that beautiful black impression in all of the nooks and crannies. And then the second one I sprayed with water, just because the first one I did all dry. So I wanted to see what the difference was going to be. And that second one had more of a second generation stamping on it. So you really didn't see a whole lot of the outlined image. And so the second one I came back in and added the stamping after the fact, which worked out perfectly. So you could do either or. I do like the first impression with in the embossing folder, but you could do them either way. And then because I wanted some more color on them, I came in with some Distress mica spray stains. I used both of the yellows, so this year's yellow and last year's yellow, so Moonlight and Flickering Candle, I do believe, and then that red from last year, which I think was like peppermint. Don't quote me on that one. And then I brought in a green. I don't remember which green, but a green. And I did mix the red and the yellow to get a different shade of orange, and then the yellow and the green to get a different shade of green. So you have more colors to play with. So I added the hearts, I added some florals, and I was just, painting on my sugar skull. So I used my stamped images as a guideline for the most part and followed those. I did add in some swirls with green and some extra little hearts here and there where I thought they needed a little bit more. Sugar skulls. All the goodness. So I ended up with 4 skull backgrounds and then 5 other backgrounds to play with. And, kickstart a little bit of my Halloween creating and making. And yes, I did have to pull out one of them because I'd already cut it down for a A2 background, and that card is coming up this week. I just have to get the editing done on that one, and it is amazing. I love how it turned out. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you at least learned a little bit something. Have a great week. Keep getting inky.